Just in case you didn't grow up in church like me and you haven't heard this story 100 times, I'm going to do the Matt recap version real quick. Is that okay? Okay, that was the only option you really had. So really quick, there were these three guys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? They were born, they were Jewish guys. They grew up Jewish. They grew up worshiping the one true living God, the same God we come in here and talk about, right? The God that like somehow etched the 10 Commandments into stone, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that God, right? They grew up worshiping that God. That is the God that they served, the God that they were faithful to. And then this kingdom kind of started to arise, Babylon, and they would go around and they would start taking all of the best and brightest and most, like the strong guys. And then, basically as you look around the room, all the guys in the room, they would take all of those guys and they would take them to Babylon and they would try to kind of indoctrinate them into their culture. And one of the first things they would do is they would change their names so that they wouldn't remember who they are and where they came from and the God that they served and all those things. And so they would try to indoctrinate them. And so they changed their names. And for these three guys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they changed their names to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I just saw the light bulb turn on for a few people like, oh, I know this story, right? And the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is really, it's a story of faithfulness to God. And the reason I love their story is God shows up and he rescues them. If you don't know the story, King Nebuchadnezzar, the king at the time, he has this great idea to have a statue built, a giant gold statue built. And every time that music played, right, and that's pretty much all the direction he gave. Every time that music played, people were supposed to turn and bow down and worship this golden statue that he put up. And so long story short, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, that's where I've got to draw the line. And if I had to name this message something, that's what I'd call it. That's where I have to draw the line. And so they draw their line and they say, no, we can't do that. And some of the king's men, they find out, they tell on him. The king gets mad. He gives them one more chance, right? Gives them one more chance to bow down to this giant statue. They say, no, sorry, that's where we have to draw the line. And so he gets furious. He has them heat the fire up in this furnace 7 times hotter, right, than it was originally. So hot that when the people went to throw them into the fire, the people that threw them in, they got burned up. Right? And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get thrown into this furnace. And then a few moments later, the king, he looks in and he asks what seems like a ridiculous question. Didn't we throw 3 guys in the fire? And, without trying to make him sound really dumb, his people answer, yeah, obviously we did throw 3 people in. And he says, well, then why do I see 4 men walking around in the fire unharmed, and one of them looks like a god? And that's one of those moments where you get excited and you go, yeah, there's my God. He showed up. He did something, right? And so the king calls in and he calls them out of the fire. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you guys come on out of there. End of the story, King Nebuchadnezzar, he says, surely there is no other God that can rescue like this. And that's the Matt recap of the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I'm going to mess their names up today at some point, story, right? And it really is a story all about faithfulness. It's a story about where they said, I have to draw the line right here. And the reason I love this story is God shows up because of their faithfulness. And if you are like me and you grew up in church, you've probably heard this story 1,000 times, right? I remember Sunday school. I remember the felt board coming out and like the weird Bible characters and a little fire over here, right? I've heard this story so many times. I've seen vegetables act this out in a television show, okay? And they had cool nicknames, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. It's just kind of trying to get a poll in the room, right? And when I was a kid, I remember asking crazy questions like, how do I do that? Right? How do I get thrown in a fire? Right? The question is really, how does God use me like that? How can I get God to use me like that? What do I have to do to get thrown in a fire so people recognize God? Right? What do I have to do? And the Sunday school teacher never had the right answer for me. She's like, I don't know. That's probably not a great idea. Talk to your parents. Right? But we ask crazy questions. Our faith is just like, what do I do? How do I do this? And then all of a sudden we get older and wiser. Well, we definitely get older. Not sure about the wise part, right? And something happens and we stop asking those crazy questions. Here's what I think happens. I think that we live more life. And as we live more life, we experience more of those moments that feel like we're in a furnace. We go through more hard times. We go through more moments like Pastor Andy is going through right now, right? And the reality that we've learned is that through life, we don't always walk through the fire and come out unburned. There's usually still hurt. There's usually some sort of scar. That's not always the Sunday school beautiful story that we just read. Like sometimes, a lot of times, it hurts and it's no good and it doesn't feel good. And we don't always understand what's going on. It's like we just saying, even when when I don't see you, I still know you're working, right? It's those moments in our faith. And I think what happens when we get in those moments in our life, instead of asking the questions, how do I get thrown in a fire, right? How can God use me to do that? I think what we do is we tend to kind of avoid those situations as much as possible. And we come nowhere near asking that question because we know what it entails. We actually know the answer to the question if we're honest. We have to be willing to draw a line and stand firm and say, watch what God's going to do. And so today my hope is, as we look at this story, we can find our way back to that faith. At least take one step closer to that childlike faith that was just sold out, all in, bought into who Jesus is because of this relationship and what we knew he could do. And so the question I ask myself as I read the story is, how do I move in that direction? How do I start that? And what I've found as I study just this is just a moment in the life of these three guys, right? This isn't their lifetime. This isn't everything that ever happened to them. This is just like a moment, a glimpse into their life. And what I've realized is it takes intentionality, right? It takes what I'm calling today drawing a line, right? It's that kind of drawing a line in the sand. And so let's look at their story, Daniel chapter 3, at the moment that they draw their line. We're going to pick up in verse 8. And just before this, just so you know, the statue has been built, right? And King Nebuchadnezzar, he's made the law that everyone has to bow down to this gold statue and all that. And I don't know if I turned this TV on or not. I could be wrong. Let me see. Wait a minute. Yeah, I did. Okay, there we go. We're good. Magic. Okay, so we're verse 8. All that's happened. The king's men have found out, and they're going to tell on him. And that's where we pick up in verse 8. It says this, but some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound, and this is my least favorite part, and he lists all these instruments, of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and then he just says other musical instruments. Why don't you just lead with that, right? Verse 11, that decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue that you have set up. Right? And so very clearly, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have drawn their line. And they said, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. That's not something that I can do. We cannot bow down to this golden statue that you put up. And so just for kind of point of reference today, I want to talk about what I mean when I say drawing a line. This is actually a definition / sentence / I don't know what you would call this, that I came up with a friend as we kind of talked through this idea at one point. And this is what we came up with. Drawing a line is this: what we will do and won't do based on our convictions, not to be polluted, corrupted, influenced, or weakened by anything that would threaten to pull us away from full devotion to God. Full devotion to God. In other words, anything that would get in the way of this, that's where I have to draw the line. Anything that's going to pull me away from full devotion to who he is and who he's called me to be, that's where I've got to draw the line. And if it's outside of that, that's fine. That's not what I'm worried about, because my faithfulness lies here. And it doesn't lie anywhere else. My faithfulness lies in who he is and who he's called me to be. And so if there's anything that threatens to pull me away from that, that's where I have to draw the line. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do in this moment. But I want to point out something to you. I want to point this out. When you draw a line, right, when you draw a line, there are always people on the other side. When you decide, I'm going to draw a line, right, it's in the sand, so to speak, there's always other people on the other side. And the reason I highlighted people is because they're people, right? Other humans, other people that were created in God's image, that he loves, that he gave his life for, right? There are other people on the other side of that line. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't draw the line. It just means we need to be aware that there are other people there. And here's the reason I think that's important. I think it's important for quite a few reasons, but I'm going to share a couple with you. I think it's important to remember because first, notice verse 12. It says that the king had put them in charge of a province of Babylon. In other words, they were surrounded by this culture. They had titles. They were pretty high up in rank and all that kind of stuff. They were surrounded by this culture. They were surrounded by people who did not hold their convictions, their values, their beliefs, all that stuff. My guess is that, you know what that feels like. I know what that feels like. And I think that sometimes we go, I don't want to be in that place. But the reality is you just can't avoid that. You can't avoid that. This is life. There are people who don't agree with you. I don't know if you know that, but we do not all believe the same thing. We don't all hold the same opinions and the same values and all those things. We are going to find ourselves in moments where we are surrounded by people who are not like us, who don't believe what we believe, and all of that. But can I tell you the second thing? That's exactly where God wants you to be. That's exactly the people he wants you to see. He wants people in your life who you do agree with as well. He wants those to be the people that are closest to you, and you guys come together and you pray together and you do life together and you go through all of that together. But he also needs you to be in the world but not of the world. He needs you to be surrounded by people who do not hold your convictions, and you to have the faithfulness, and for me to have the faithfulness to say, that's where I've got to draw the line. But remembering that when I draw that line on the other side, there are people involved. Because, see, I think it's really easy to just kind of pull the human element out and just focus on the I'm right, you're wrong side of things, right? If we're honest, we are all guilty of that.